Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan.
And I'm Eric Mertz.
And this is episode 52 of the podcast. And it's January 27th, 2022 as we record this. Today, we're going to be talking about reading like a writer. But we want to first say that this podcast is sponsored by our patrons at patreon.com/Valerie Isan, IHSAN. For as low as $1 a month, you can get a shout out on the podcast and we can make announcements for you on the podcast. And at other tiers, the benefits increase: free books, accountability Zoom calls, scene analysis, mastermind calls, and even free writer craft retreat tickets. Become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Isan. What are you reading? How's everything? Well, I just got back from visiting my family in Florida. I'm not from Florida. I'm from Oregon, sort of. Actually, come to think of it, I was actually born in Washington State, but grew up in Oregon. And but my sister, when she got married in Portland, she moved to Kentucky, which is where her husband is from. And then they moved to Minnesota for a job that he had. And they lived there for a number of years. And my sister hates the cold probably more than I do. So
out of Minnesota.
Yeah, she was, okay, I'm totally done with this. I have to go somewhere warm, so they decided on Florida for whatever reason. But I went and saw them for the first time since before the pandemic. So that was really great. And my mom moved with them. So I got to see her too. So that's what I did last week.
Cool. Sounds great. Reading anything good?
I listened to an audiobook on the airplane called Not a Sound. And I don't remember the name of I'm going to look it up right now under my audiobooks.
Well, you're looking it up. I am reading Good Talk. Actually, I have the book in my hand right here. This is the Multnomah County Everybody Reads 2022 book, which is a program they do where they make the book available through every branch, and then they have discussions about the book. So this is a memoir, and I figure you'd appreciate this as a memoir person. This is a memoir in conversations, and it's a graphic novel. And it's really interesting. Mira Jacobs is a first generation Indian woman from New York City, and it goes through her firsthand, everything from arranged marriages to the Trump phenomenon to explaining race to her children.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's hilarious at times, and then like the next page, it's kind of heartbreaking. So
yeah, I've never read a graphic novel before, so we sold that in the bookstore that I work at, and it was really popular.
Never read a graphic novel?
I've never read a graphic. I mean, no. When I was reading to my kids when they were little, they were starting to get into manga and anime and whatever. I forget which one's the book and which one's
manga,
okay. And so I picked one up, or they had one from the library or something. And so I tried reading that once to them, but that's like impossible. You can't read a graphic novel out loud to somebody else. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So so no, I've never. So I wasn't like drawn to that medium, but maybe I should check it out because the story itself sounds really interesting and right up my alley. I've just never consumed graphic books.
It's definitely a different. I mean, we're going to talk a lot about reading, right? And so in this episode, so it's different. It's not the same, but in that whole conversation of what's good reading, and there's people who don't think that audiobooks are actually reading books or graphic novels. There's this kind of senseless debate. I think this is a great way to just see storytelling from a different point of view. So
yeah, and it's really inclusive, and I think it's great for kids that are having that transition, like they're not really into books and reading yet, but parents are trying to get them to be interested in that. Right. So graphic novels is a great bridge for that. I looked up the author for Not a Sound, and it's Heather Gudenkauf. It was a really, really interesting book about this woman that had, after an accident, become profoundly deaf, and it's a murder mystery. And so
interesting.
She finds this dead body that was a friend of hers before her accident, and all this chaos ensues, and she's in danger, and it was really interesting.
Wow, I'm gonna write that down because I know a lot of people who like those kind of mysteries. Go over well. Cool.
Yeah.
And so you listened to the whole thing.
Yes, I did.
And
I consider that reading.
Right. So do I.
Because you're consuming the book, because that means like no blind person can read. And I think that's silly.
Right.
Of course they can read.
Right.
They're
Unless it's an ocean of gray text on a white page or black text on a white page, it's not actually reading. You're not learning anything unless it's that. Come on. Cool. I just think the limits on what is considered healthy reading, pulling the cap off of that is reading is important on all levels and
for so many reasons. Yeah. And when I became a parent, I decided that I would never limit my kids to what they wanted to read. You know, I would never, I limited their screen time, or if there were like violent images or, you know, on the screen, and I don't know, as a parent, maybe this was a wrong choice, but I figured that if they read about that violence or naughty words or, you know, whatever situations, it would come across different, you know, they would experience it different than if they saw it on the screen.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a level of engagement when you're reading where you are, you're more in control. Whereas I feel like with the image on the TV, especially, like
that is really interesting. I never thought of it that way, because I mean, when I read, when I'm fully immersed in a book and I'm just in another world, I love that. And as an adult, I actually don't get there very often anymore. And I think that's because of just our adult responsibilities. And we're always listening for kids or dogs or, you know, someone at the door or whatever, or I gotta do this thing and the dishes are piling up. And so it's almost like there's almost a veil sort of in front of the book and you can't quite get into that other world because of those other things. And I think that kids can really like dive in. And so I'm always on a quest to find a book that's so well written that I really fall into it. And I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, it's funny you say that, you go there, because look, I have a 7-year-old, so I love reading the books to my kid. It's the chore that I will always take when my wife and I are deciding what you're going to do. Precisely one book in 2021 brought me to tears, and that was a book that I was reading to him. It was a book we found in one of the little libraries in Portland. It was a book for 8 to 10-year-olds, and it was called Miss Bixby's Last Day. It was about a school teacher that's battling cancer and these 3 boys who have this profound attachment to her and their kind of last gesture of love to this teacher. I mean, I was brought to tears by it. And you just, you know, that's not the standard, but like that immersion, like, you know, for kids is especially, you know, it's just so important to, again, take the cap off of it, dive into it, get out of it what there is, and feel some of what's in that book.
But I really liked what you said before about having some control over that. Even if you're, even if you have dove in, if you've dived in and you're there in that other world, obviously you can come right back out if you need to or want to. And when you are watching something, when you're watching a movie, those images that flash there for me and my strengths and weaknesses or psychoses or whatever, those stay there. And sometimes I still have nightmares sometimes about like images that have flash frozen in front of my psyche, you know, and those pop up like when I'm extra scared or, you know, for some other reason. They come back.
Because we give authority to the image on the TV versus like taking control in a book. And for just an example, like my idiot is a bad word in my house. We don't use it. But in the last month, I've heard idiot come up on the TV, and there's this, my son gets this reaction like, oh, bad word. But when I've read it in a book, I've noticed that he's a little more puzzled, right? I watch him sort of digest, why would that character say that? You know, because he's more attached to it. It's not just a spectacle. And so, yeah, we should all be reading a lot more books. And we should all have that moment where we immerse, right? Forget the dishes.
Yes. Amen. How can we, I wonder, I mean, I like that we're more in control when we're reading, but I also kind of want that I crave that immersion. And if that happens through movies more often, because we're not as in control, as you said, I wonder how we can read in a way that allows us to give some control to the author, or if that's important, or if that's bad. I mean, I don't know. Is it possible even? Why would one want to do that? Just for that immersion?
I think these are the mysteries of like why, you know, people get so passionate about the written word. You know, Eric Witchey always jokes about how it's just a bunch of scribbles on a line that create a hallucination in your brain, and then it's nothing more than that. Yeah, I think that part of it is that when it comes to a book, you are, you know, you're in that world, you've been given permission, and you're going down this road, and you have some control because you are using your picture of what, you know, let's say the author is describing a you know, an old car, or a dog with a limp, or, you know, a waitress's smile, you know, something. I'm clearly in like 3 different books in my head, but you know, like you get to imprint some of that on that. Like I think of, you know, an old car that's familiar to me, I think of my, you know, so you can bring some of your life and in your experience to that. I think where, you know, you get swept up is when, you know, that like those images begin, like those chain together into an emotional experience. That's where like the reading really like, to me, I get lost in it when it's like I'm suddenly like in that car, and I'm in that, like I'm feeling scenes from life through that story. That's, to me, you can't do that in a movie so much.
Interesting.
That is like, it is that blue car. I don't know. Please comment if you feel differently.
Yes, you can go to the show notes at valerieislan.com/podcast-news.
I felt like it was really important that we talk about this topic because it's part of the writing experience is if you go to a writing conference, writers conference, or retreat or anything, the number one thing you're going to see in everybody's hands, outside of like a pen or a paper to write with or something to write with, is books. I mean, we go to these conferences and then we walk out with an armload of books, right?
Yes.
And that is because the overlap of readers and writers is, you know, it's almost complete. Like most writers are readers, correct?
Well, yeah. And you always hear I mean, it's not even really advice. It's like the standard. If you want to write, you have to read. And I get really flummoxed at the writers that say they don't have time to read.
Oh.
It's part of your job description. Like
it is.
You have to do it.
Do you remember when you first heard that advice, if you're going to write, you need to read?
I don't remember like the day, but it was at a Willamette Writers Conference, I'm sure.
I remember hearing it from a creative writing teacher, and just they said it like it was this law, you know, like red light, yellow light, green light. Also, fact of life is if you're going to write, you're going to read. But that was where she left it. You know, she left that comment dangling out there for a room full of wannabe writers to interpret. You know, like, what does that mean? Like, am I just going to, what am I supposed to read? And the more I think about this experience of being a writer and becoming a writer, which we're always becoming a writer, no matter how accomplished we are or think we are, I think like coming up with something, an answer to that question, like, you know, what does that mean to me if I'm going to be a writer and I need to read, like having a way to address that. Because I think there's a lot of ways you can go off there. And
off meaning what?
Pardon?
Off meaning what? What do you mean by
off? Well,
I
think that, you know, if you look at the way like arguments around books start, like we were talking about with graphic novels, you know, you might have some serious people or people who take themselves seriously who will say, well, you can't read a graphic novel if you want to write the great American novel, because one is drivel and the other is high art, right? You can hear people say, if you're going to be a fantasy writer, you can't read, don't read mystery. All you need to read is fantasy. And I think there's this, I think everybody's trying to prescribe, and then this is the world we live in too, right? I mean, everybody's got a solution, 10 steps to do this, 5 things to do that. And I think writers have fallen a bit into that trap where they feel like I have to find a prescription to my reading problem and I've got to follow it dogmatically. And I just think we need to like loosen the reins a little bit and look at it a little more broadly, because you lose the enjoyment, right?
Yeah, first off, do it so that you enjoy it. I mean, that's why we all became writers to begin with, I think, is because stories were so enjoyable and we wanted to do that too. And we felt compelled to do that as well.
Right.
So getting back to reading, because of the pandemic, I've heard a lot of people say that they can't read anymore. It's too distracting, or that they're too distracted, or there's too much collective grief, or whatever the reason, they can't get back into reading. And so I've heard, working at the bookstore, a lot of people talking about how they managed that, or how they got around that, or how they broke through it. And some of it was reading outside your genre, not reading short stories or reading essays, something that was in small little bits. So somebody started reading again by reading those day books, where every day there's like a paragraph or two of just something inspirational. Yeah. And it was just sort of like a brain hack, I guess, or a habit forming ritual that allowed them to get back to the words on the page, whether writing it or reading it.
Right. That's interesting. I've definitely I've heard people equate like the lack of reading with the pandemic, but I've heard some people say they've stopped reading fiction since the pandemic began because there's so much serious going on that they need to read more facts. And I've looked at it the opposite. Like,
yeah,
I can't trust the facts anymore, so I'm going to give me more fiction.
Right.
Know.
Yeah. And we all have those books that we go to when we need something. If I need more comfort, I tend to go to Regency romance. If I want more lighthearted, not lighthearted, but like mysteries, often I'll go to if I need something that I don't have to concentrate on, like they're a faster read for me.
Right.
And when I want something really juicy, dive into, like linger on the page, it's going to be fiction that has more description and is more setting centric, more literary.
Romance is a good for you, is a go-to for you.
Romance? Well, I wouldn't say it's a go-to. I haven't liked romance, or at least all the subgenres of romance, a lot in my past. I do tend to like, Jane Austen and Jane Austen-ish stories. So that Regency time period, I like historical fiction. So that was an easy go-to for me, I guess. And those historical fiction novels generally are, I don't know, easier for me to read. They're more lighthearted. They're more societal, as opposed to, I guess all historical fiction has something to say about society.
Right.
Actually. So
I guess I need to think about what my go-tos in different reading times. I definitely pick up graphic novels more often now. I think because I like I think that they're more packed story-wise. I think that if you look at the way comics and graphic storytelling is done, I think there's more plot that goes into like an issue of a comic book than goes into most novels, right? So you can go through and just see how a plot is executed just really quickly. And you can do it there's always a lot of archetypes, and there's always a lot of like things happen in really big terms. There's a lot of like what I call like grand gestures. And so I think you can boil that down really quickly. So I tend to like that. That's I guess been my comfort food lately, if anything. It's just fine. Take my kid to the library and I set him loose on the kids' books, and then I go grab graphic novels and we're all happy. But I think that, you hit on something, like you just talked about very different genres. You talked about, kind of Regency romance and mystery. And I think one of the, and I think you see it a lot in the self-publishing world, in chat groups and rooms, in social media, about it's that reading in your genre, that lockstep reading in your genre. I'll see a lot of people make comments about, I wanted to write an epic fantasy, so I read these epic fantasies and I basically mimicked how they worked. And I think there's good in that. Obviously, you have to know your genre.
Yeah.
It's really important, because you probably read a lot of manuscripts for people, and there you can see genre convention is missed. Mm-hmm. But I think you lose something when that's the only touchstone you have for, your storytelling. I mean, George R. R. Martin, fantasy author, that wasn't the only. He cut his teeth writing other things, science fiction, television. So I think we can get really drilled down into this genre brand buy-in that limits us.
What do you think about voice when that happens? Do you think that? I think that you can develop your voice more if you are more widely read.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I agree 100%. I think that you're better off reading one book from 5 genres to find your voice than trying to read one, because genre conventions are one thing, right? The genre conventions are the archetypal characters, or
the obligatory scenes.
Yeah, those are staples, but they're different than voice. It's so different, because you can read, if you were an insightful reader, you could read 5 of those fantasy novels and see that those are 5 different fantasy voices, and they clearly didn't come from the same place. So yeah, I think voice comes from a lot more, and it's a lot more than just reading.
So writers need to read.
Yeah.
And they need to read outside their genre.
I think so, definitely.
I think so too. And then what about the intentionality of reading? So I've also heard lots of people, and it's true for me too, unfortunately, like as a writer, when you're reading or even watching a movie, right, sometimes those glaring, there's the obligatory scene where this happens, or that's the inciting incident, or, like it becomes, I guess maybe not as an editor too. Right. I'm really hyper focused on that when I'm reading. Right. This is grammatically incorrect, or whatever. Right. Like that stuff does come in, which I think does prevent me from diving into that, past that veil and getting immersed in the story, because there is that editor brain kind of that's still there, or that writer brain that's like examining, because that's how we get better as writers, is we read the books and we dissect them and see, the ones that resonate with us, the people that we like to read. If you like Alice Hoffman or Sarah Addison Allen or Sarah Painter, or like, these are all authors that I love and read almost everything they write. And I want my work to resonate with others the way their work resonates with me. So I dissect, where is the conflict here? Where is the choice here? So you have to read that way as a writer to get better at your craft. So can you turn that off? Do you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to read this only as a reader? Can you do that? Well,
and I think that goes back to the big, I know that feeling of you're reading a book, and like if you look at the book on my Goodreads, if you look at the books that I didn't finish, probably half of them fell into that category because they just didn't meet the genre. There was a book, I won't name it, but it was about this, like, it was this high concept dragon thing, and the dragon didn't appear like 2/3 of the way through the book. The dragon, which is on the cover of the book, didn't appear. And okay, I'm done. I'm now not even interested. So I think it's hard. It's impossible to be a reader and a writer. Just like if you're a cook, can you go into a restaurant and taste food and just not, you wonder about the spices, and you wonder about the cook time. And so you can't help it. I think it's those books, like I was describing the one I read to my kid, Miss Bixby's Last Day, that book, I was not aware of what was going on as a writer. I was a reader. I felt that way about All the Light That We Cannot See.
Oh, Anthony Doerr. Okay.
I read that book in 3 days, And because I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, to me, is some of the magic. But I think that's part of something you have to, like, when you become, that idea of becoming an aficionado, kind of like that. I know that sounds a little pompous, but like when you get to that level where you're able to diagram something, you're able to pull it apart, you're going to lose some of that magic. You're going to probably do that for your spouse or partner or friends when you're sitting with them and watching movies and saying, wait for it, here it comes, or they'll do it too. But I think that there's a reward
stop
in
movies
that too.
and say, that was a continuity error. Look, it was this way before, and then the scene break. And
my wife used to love movies, and now she like kind of like watches them because she'll see things like, oh, that isn't supposed to be there, and that's not supposed to be like that. I think analytical is, yes, you have to be analytical, but I think if you feel yourself sweeping into the book, let it go.
Just, of course, yeah,
enjoy
it.
Yeah, enjoy it. And I think part of the, that intentionality beforehand, there's this meme going around on Facebook that I really like, and it's basically just says like, make your reading list out of the books you want to read, the things you're interested in. Don't worry about finishing series. Don't worry about reading what everyone else is reading. Read what you enjoy because you enjoy it. And I think there's something to be said for that too. Like if you're not enjoying it, but it's good for you, I mean, you don't have to take your medicine. There's so many books out there. You can go and find something you're going to enjoy it and benefit from it as a writer. So.
Excellent.
Do you agree?
So I do. Yeah. And if you want to get into the weeds a little bit, I guess if you are a writer listening to this podcast and you feel like, we're not trying to shame anyone about not reading enough. So if you do find yourself in that category, like, oh, I really should be reading more often. I had a friend ask me like how to restart a reading habit, and some of the things that came out of that conversation were setting, a timer. Right. I know that sounds lame, but like, I remember in middle school, I think it was, we had I think it was called Drop Everything and Read. It was DEAR, Drop Everything and Read. And so it was at the same time every day. It was like before like a certain period, sixth period or something like that. And we had to do it for 10 minutes. So you had to have your book of choice with you during that time period. So they would set a timer for 10 minutes and everybody had to stop and read their book. And it was just, to try to encourage that reading habit.
Right.
For me in the past, this hasn't been recent for me, but in the past, I've felt like I was watching too much TV. So I would tell myself, okay, you have to read for 30 minutes before the TV goes on. Or one thing that I am totally embracing these days is I feel like I'm not getting as much reading time as I want. I do read a lot, multiple times a day, but I still feel like there's so many books I want to read. Yeah. And in order to like create a bigger hole, a bigger spot for me to slip into that reading world, I set one night a week as my reading night. So when I come home from work, I'm not turning on the TV. I'm not, going to do anything else but just sit with a beverage and read. And good. I love that. Wednesday night is my reading night.
The best advice somebody gave me, I was in a bad reading rut. It was probably 2 years after college, so it's been a while now. And I think I just burned out. I have a degree in English, so I read so much at school. It was ridiculous. And I just burned out. And I was burned out because I was reading the canon and I was finished filling the holes that I didn't read in my degree. And then I just lost interest. And somebody said, I can still see their face. I don't remember their name, but I remember them saying, you don't have to finish the book. And that permission, which took me years to fully embrace,
just got chills.
Is great. Why? Why did you get chills?
Just because ditto, like that's been I'm a rule upholder. And if I start a book, I have to finish the book. But I've had enough people in my life say, no, you really don't. No. And you know what? Okay, I have to give kudos to my friend and coworker Steve Ellerhoff, also a fellow writer.
Hey, Steve.
And hey, Steve. He said, because I wanted this is going to sound so terrible, but it's part of my, well, I wanted not proof, but like I keep a list of all the books that I read.
Me too.
And if I start a book, then like, where does that go? I can't say I've read it because I haven't read it. I only started it. So Steve
Goodreads gives you credit for it, which I think is silly.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So Steve said, and I don't know where this word popped out, but I glommed onto it. So these are books that I've tasted.
Wow.
So I have a separate list for books that I've tasted.
I'm going to change my Goodreads label from did not finish to tasted. Well, think about it again. All the experiences we read to give ourselves joy, right? Think of all the other things we do in our lives to give ourselves joy. You know, music and food and wine and company. You leave a party early. You don't drink the whole bottle all the time. You turn off the music. Like it's perfectly. You know, you don't always listen to the whole album. There's just so many ways I think as readers we've been, and I don't want to say it because I want everybody to read through all of the things I ever write all the way through to the end, but you don't have to. It's not, there's no badge of honor like dragging to the end of a book.
No, and you can still get the badge by putting it on your books I have tasted list.
Books, I'm changing it. As soon as we're done, we're changing it.
That's awesome.
I think the last thing, like, when I thought about all the topics around this that were important is I think it's important that if you are reading intentionally, and I think that, let's say you are doing that dive into your genre, you're in that phase and you want to read sci-fi and, you're going to read, Arthur Clarke and Heinlein, and you're going to read the biggies. But I think it's also important as you're educating yourself about what works in a genre is to read some of what doesn't work. And I say that it does feel like you're passing judgment on some books by saying, well, this clearly doesn't work, I'm going to read it. But I think recognizing how a great book is orchestrated and written, and then looking at books that aren't there is a great tool for you to look at your writing and say, like we talked about with the story diagnostic, underdeveloped character, the setting in this doesn't work. And seeing that in action, seeing that on the page. If you're an editor, you get that opportunity a lot. But if you're a reader looking for that, I would say go find some books in your genre that aren't classics, that don't have 4.5 stars on Goodreads or Amazon, and find some things that books where the voice struggles a bit and see what that's like, so you can. And there's more, you can just taste those books, but get a taste for that, because I think it really develops your sense of, okay, here's how I'm going to make that work.
Definitely, in terms of, being a part of a critique group is what started my editing career too, and it also really helps you become a better writer when you're seeing it not work in other work. Right. Does that make sense? Well, I said work twice in the same sentence. My editor brain just blinked.
I'm glad you said that, because that's actually like the sort of the more positive spin on what I was kind of clumsily saying. And that is, read your peers' work in progress and see the process of how it goes. That's huge. Yeah. So it's really big.
Also, this, I guess, it kind of tacks on to this. I don't know. I'm not trying to do a shameless plug, I promise. But there is that story rubric that we went through when I did the story diagnostic on your novel. You can get a free copy of the story rubric by going to my website. It's just on there. You can just download it for free. And that gives you that ability to look without emotion at the different areas of your novel and kind of grade them. I don't like using that word, but you can read other people's work or your own work, or even other novels, contemporary novels that you're reading from the library, and kind of match it up and see where they fall in these different areas.
Yeah, what I liked about that story rubric, and now, I mean, this may be like a slight diversion, but I think it's a worthy one, is that you, it is really, I think in our head, we sort of know that there's a lot of criteria that we put what we read through. Is it the sentences flow, the characters get, all those things, like we know they're there, but to see that in that rubric form, and just to see like, oh, right, this and this, these are all elements, and we're not making that, we're not intellectually doing a checklist every chapter on every book, but we are subconsciously going through that checklist.
As a
That
reader,
is,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, that was a really, it was very eye-opening on that manuscript to hear that from you. But then reading the rubric beforehand, it just, brought together that realization, like, yes, this is the standard we're all trying to meet, hopefully.
So do you think as writers that we should find a book that we have read as a reader, preferably, and then dissect it with a story rubric, or just a case study, like rip it apart and find the areas that work and that don't work? And is that a worthy exercise?
I think that would be. I just had a conversation with a guy that I'm working with on a project, and when I called him, he was copying passages out of a book, just reading, like he was looking at a book and he was writing it, and we were talking about it, and he said, I just want to know what it feels like to write this well, these words, just like, I love this so much. And it was, I mean, it's such a heartfelt thing to say, and so I really like appreciated that. But I think that speaks to what you're saying. I think taking something and then looking, and maybe taking that book you really love and looking at it and saying, well, this maybe doesn't excel at this area. Maybe this is a little better in this area, and because I think why we like things is pretty eye-opening. Like, I think why, and what we're allowed to let pass too can be eye-opening.
As a writer?
Yeah. Like when you read and you like, I think there's things we're willing to, I think a lot of readers, like for example, in the big genres, are willing to give up, flowery, flowy prose in the interest of hitting that genre convention, like a drum beat. You can read a lot of that stuff and it's not flowery and wonderful prose. But then a literary reader isn't willing to do that. They want that. A Regency romance reader, they want that flowy prose. They want that swept away language. So I think it would be really valuable, actually. Good advice.
I also think in terms of like reading outside your genre, for instance, or if you're studying craft books because you know that you need help with your dialogue or whatever. I was reading, excuse me. I was reading nature books, nature writing, because I wanted to understand how to talk about setting. I went to it was at the writing conference, or the writing retreat I had last summer, and Joe Wilkins came and spoke, and he writes memoir and poetry and literary novels, and I really like his writing style. And part of that is that poetic setting. It's just super rich.
Right.
And I like that in novels. And so I asked him, like, how do you develop that? And that was what he said, was educate yourself about the real words for things.
Right.
Take a botany class, or, study that so that you have the vocabulary to write your settings, which I thought was, I mean, it's kind of common sense, but it took somebody else saying that exactly to me to go, oh, that makes sense. So if you're trying to study craft, you can read craft books about the area that you're diving into, or you can find something equivalent in fiction.
Right. No, that's a great point. I mean, I think I can see that. Like, I can see that. I can't think of anything off of any particular writer offhand, but when you read, I always read about the author. I read the whole book, and why I read that about the author is because I find it fascinating how there is some of that overlap in a lot of writers have that overlap. Like they studied this, then they went into that. I'm reading a book right now. I've been reading it for a while because it's so huge, but it's interviews with mystery authors, and almost all of those mystery authors started out doing something that put them in a career of inquiry. They were either a coroner, a reporter, a lawyer, or something. They learned the language. They got that authority, and that authority was enough to do the thing they didn't know how to do. They didn't know how to write a novel, but they knew enough about the law to get close. That's great. Yeah, I mean, read outside of fiction in the expertise of the thing that you're looking for. That's great. If I'm working on a horror novel, I guess I should read some anatomy books or some right. I mean, makes sense.
All right. Well, thanks for talking with me today, Eric.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love it. You're welcome. What are we talking about next week? Have we decided yet?
I think it's on dialogue. What is next? Yeah. Next week we'll be talking with actually dialogue Dr. Jeff Elkins.
Awesome.
And so we'll get to pick his brain about how to work dialogue into your novels. And I really like his way of, I don't know if I guess identifying who characters are to other characters in your novels, which I thought was really interesting. He calls them anchors, engines, or hazards.
Oh, so, I can't wait for this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I can't wait either.
It's going to be great.
So come next week and listen to Dialogue Dr. Jeff Elkins. And if you want to get retreat tickets, the retreat is August 11th through the 14th this summer at TP Village in Marcola, Oregon on the Mackenzie River. And you can go to ValerieEson.com/retreat to get more information there. And there is monthly payment plans. So anything else? I think that we covered Patreon, we covered the retreat tickets. Anything else you want to mention?
No.
No.
Have a great writing week, everybody, and talk to you soon.
All right. Awesome. Bye now.